What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. I'm recording this on Tuesday, October 21st. It is NBA opening night. I do apologize for these coming out a little late. I was intending to have the rest of my Contender Tiers series be done before the season started, but it was a busy last few days for me, so I wasn't able to get it all in, on top of finishing my top 100 player rankings for this year. So if you've not checked those out, go on my website at theseanjonesnbashow.com and check them out. They're also everywhere on my socials. But for the purpose of this podcast, I'm going to do tiers 4 and tiers 3 for my contender tiers. So there will only be one more episode after this of tiers 2 and 1, the top contenders in the NBA, in my opinion, going into this season. And I will preview the rest of the team. We've got 10 teams left, and I'll cover 6 of them on this one. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So I'm going to start out with tier 4 in this episode. This tier has 2 teams, and this tier is called Too Old, Too Injury Prone. 2 teams that, on paper, if everything went right and they had good health and got a little lucky come playoff time, they are threats. They have as much talent as basically anybody in the league, but there's just a lot of outstanding question marks between if guys can stay healthy and just general track records with a lot of people on these teams in general. And so for that, they are kind of knocked down a notch from the rest of the at least semi-contenders in the NBA, in my opinion, because they're just too old and they're just too injury prone. So starting off with the first team in this tier at number 10, we have the Los Angeles Clippers, who had a really solid year last year. I was on record saying I thought they would be one of the bottom 3 teams in the Western Conference. I think a lot of people thought they would take a significant step back last season after losing Paul George in free agency, not really replacing him with much outside of Derrick Jones Jr. and some role guys on the fringe, Nick Batum, people of that ilk, if you will. And Kawhi Leonard was injured to start the season, and there was not a very clear timeline for when he was going to come back. Let me know if you've heard that one before. But yeah, so it really was just Harden and a bunch of role players going into the season. And so it was yet to be seen if Harden could really carry a team like that. We hadn't really seen him do it on his own since Houston, after being alongside guys like Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving in Brooklyn, and then Embiid and Maxey in Philadelphia. But they end up winning 50 games. They kind of stayed afloat for the first part of the season. Then when Kawhi came back in the second half, they really took off and looked like one of the best teams in the NBA going into the playoffs. But this offseason, they lose Amir Coffey, Ben Simmons, those guys, fringe rotation guys at best, not huge losses, but they also let Norman Powell go in a trade that landed them John Collins. They also signed Bradley Beal after he was bought out by Phoenix, and then bring Chris Paul back home as well. They also drafted Yannick Conan Niedenhauser. That's quite the mouthful there. 7-foot guy that was drafted late first round. I do not anticipate him to get much playing time on this team. And they also add Brook Lopez, who I forgot to mention. So there's a lot to like about this team. I mean, they legitimately go 11 deep with a legit rotation of guys that can play, with Harden and Chris Paul running the show, Bradley Beal, Chris Dunn, Bogdan Bogdanovic in the backcourt with those guys. On the wing, they've got Kawhi Leonard, Derrick Jones Jr., Nick Batum. They add John Collins to that 4 spot. And then with Zubac and Brook Lopez, they have one of the best center duos in the NBA. And I really do like most of these additions. I mean, last year, they really didn't have a backup center. Zubac was tremendous for them. He had a career year. There was all NBA buzz about him. He played his best basketball on both ends of the court. Harden really unlocked him offensively as just a guy that he can spoon feed in the pick and roll. But then defensively, he was really, really good and anchored what was a top 3 defense in the NBA last year, the Clippers. That was their calling card. They were tremendous defensively all season long. That was how they were able to stay afloat with Kawhi Leonard out last year. And so adding Brook Lopez to that, who has, I'll say this, he's definitely lost a bit of a step. He looked not very good at times last year. He obviously still can stretch the floor. He still can block shots at the rim. He's not the same full-time anchor in the paint that he maybe once was in his earlier years in Milwaukee. But, I mean, if he's your backup playing max 20 minutes a game, like, that is such a luxury to have for this team. And if Zubac were to miss any time, he can fill in super nicely as a spacer at the 5 spot, as well as a good rim protector there. I really, really like the John Collins ad for this team as well, because he brings such a archetype of player that they just haven't had in recent years. They've really, throughout this era of Kawhi Leonard and previously Paul George, those have been the guys at the forward spot, those two, and they've been kind of forced to have one of them play power forward. And the NBA is shifting back towards being a little bigger, and a lot of teams are playing double bigs. And so they get put in scenarios where they can't really match up well when teams do that against them. But Collins brings them just diversity in the types of lineups they can put out there, because he's probably best suited to play power forward, which is his most natural position. And they haven't had a four that can do what he does as a legit lob threat, as a guy that can space the floor as well, a guy that is a pretty good weak side shot blocker on help defense. You know, he's not a perfect player. He's not going to be overly creative offensively. He's going to probably rely on the guards to get him the ball in his spots. But hey, there are a lot of guards to get him the ball in the spots. Between Chris Paul or James Harden, he's going to be playing with one of them at all times, basically on the court. So he poses a tremendous threat as a lob guy with those guys in the pick and roll, in the pick and pop. And we've seen him at his best in the past next to Trae Young, a guy who does similar things to Harden and what Chris Paul could do for him. But he also gives them diversity where they can go a little smaller. He can play a little small ball five in spurts. Again, you don't want to make ring full time, but at least gives you the option there. So just having that flexibility of that extra type of skill set that they haven't had a four with size like that. They can like play small ball five, that can be a lob threat like that. So that's just huge for them, in my opinion. And I've always been a John Collins guy. Anyone that's listened to my podcast, read any of my articles, I've defended him over the years. He's had some up and down years, but he's uber efficient. He's like a 50, 40, 80 guy flirting with every single year. Again, not the most versatile guy on defense, but he doesn't need to play some massive role in this team. He really is more of a luxury for what they have. And then I know Norman Powell was spectacular for this team last year. He had a career year and, you know, was way better than me or really anyone could have thought he would be, especially at age 32. You know, you don't normally see career years in people's early 30s, but he's definitely just more limited than like a Bradley Beal, for example. I think Powell is maybe a little more consistent and you know exactly what you're getting, versus Beal has, you know, had injury issues. He's been inconsistent just in general over the past few years. But with Powell, he's really just a straight line driver to the basket and a spot up shooter. He's not much of a creator. He does virtually nothing in the playmaking department. He's not a great defender. So he's just more of a one dimensional guy, even though he's really, really good at what he does. But Beal can do basically everything Powell does. Even if you want to say he's not as good of a shooter, not as good of a straight line driver, he's at least 80 to 90% of what Powell is. But he brings so much more from a ball handling and a playmaking and passing and all those aspects of the game. So again, just a more diverse skill set, but he also can shoot the hell out of the ball from deep. I mean, for all the hate he got in Phoenix, and he deserved a lot of it, but he had his most efficient couple seasons that he's had basically as a pro. I mean, he was a 50% from the field, 40% from three guy right around there in his time in Phoenix. So his role is diminished and the impact wasn't what we thought it would be, but he still did play very well in terms of just being an efficient offensive player, particularly scoring wise. And then Chris Paul, I don't know how big of a role he's going to have, but he at least will take some pressure off Harden, because Harden had to do everything for this team last year. Everything. Even when Kawhi came back, they just didn't have the requisite playmaking and ball handling around these guys, where it's like they had a lot of good role players, but who did you trust most with the ball outside of Harden and Kawhi? Guess Powell, but like I said, that's not really his thing. He's more of an off-ball guy, or like a make one dribble and pass or shoot. So he's not out there like manipulating the defense or anything like that. But Chris Paul can do that. And it just takes more pressure off of James Harden, even though Paul is a significantly diminished version of what he used to be. He's still a useful player and really did help the Spurs and Wembanyama and their offense and just getting them into their set. So now they have two guys that can do that. I haven't even talked about Kawhi and, you know, Derrick Jones Jr., Chris Dunn, all of that. But it's just to show that this is a deep team. Like, there's an argument to be made that this is on paper the best, most talented, deepest Clippers team in the Kawhi era, even though they've had a lot of really good teams as well. But they haven't had this combination of lineup versatility and size and playmaking and ball handling. So it's just a really nice constructed roster with a lot of just professionals, guys that you know exactly what you're going to get out of them on a nightly basis, particularly during the regular season, I'll say. But like, they have a really high floor in general, because even if guys miss time, if Kawhi misses 20 to 25 games, like, they're much more equipped to be able to handle that this year, because they've got more shot creation in Bradley Beal. They've got more guys that can play make in Chris Paul. They've got more reliable scorers and shooters like John Collins. So they also have Zubac's insurance. They have Chris Paul insurance. So they're much better suited to have a really strong regular season this year. But obviously, the question's always going to be there with the Clippers. I mean, the reason they're in the tier that they're in is because they're just, first of all, they're really old. Like, this is a very, very old roster right now. If you just go down the line, Chris Paul is 40 years old, Bradley Beal 32, Bogdanovich 33, James Harden 36, Kawhi Leonard 34, Batum 36, Brook Lopez 37. Like, they're old as hell. There's no way around it. This is an old roster. And a lot of these guys haven't exactly been the poster boy for health, to say the least. I mean, Kawhi has played more than 60 games once since 2017, and he's averaged 42 per year since 2018. So we know that he's just like a liability to miss half the season at any point. He seems healthy now, but it's something that you always have to keep in the back of your mind with them. Bradley Beal hasn't played more than 60 games since 2019, hasn't hit the 55-game mark since 2021, has averaged 52 per year since 2020. So he's another guy that's just been mark him out for 30 games a year, basically, over the last 5 years or so. John Collins has hit 65 games only twice since his rookie season, 56 per year since 2020. Another guy that hasn't been super healthy. I know Chris Paul played all 82 games last year, but he's had health issues in general throughout his career, and he's a 40-year-old 6 foot to 6'1" player. Like, it would make sense if he had durability issues as well. Like I said, they should be better equipped with their depth to be able to overcome that, but that is really only for the regular season. And if we're talking contender tiers, we're talking playoffs. And if Kawhi Leonard is out at any point during the playoffs, this team will not win a playoff series unless they're the 1 seed and get a very favorable matchup or something. If James Harden misses any time, they will not win a playoff series. If they're missing Collins and Beal and Paul and whoever, like, it's just going to be an uphill battle. And you never want to assume injury, but this is one of those teams where you almost kind of can. I mean, Kawhi made it through the playoffs last year. That was the first playoff run where the entirety he played every game and was at least presumably healthy since 2020, since the bubble. Like, he's either missed part or all of the playoffs every other year for them. And so it's just really hard to trust them. And that doesn't even mention that, let's say they're healthy. Do you trust James Harden in the big moments in a game 7, for example? If they're playing the Nuggets in a game 7, I'm never going to pick the Clippers. If they're playing the Thunder in a game 7, I'm never going to pick the Clippers. If they're playing like the Lakers and Luka, I'm picking Luka over Harden in a game 7 every single time. So there's just a lot of uncertainty for them come postseason time. And so I just think that they're likely to have an injury at some point that could derail them. They're well equipped in the regular season, but playoffs is a different story. And so I just am not in the business of trusting this team come playoff time at all. Between Kawhi and James Harden, Kawhi for health issues, Harden for just reliability issues with his play in the postseason, it's just a bad combination. And until we see a team built around one of these guys, or in this case, both of them, make a deep run, like we have not seen at all in the last 5 years for at least Kawhi and for Harden's entire career, I'm going to need to see it to believe it. So with that, that's kind of why I have them a notch down in the West, despite on paper, it looks really nice. Then the next team in this tier, and the last team in this tier, number 9, we have the Golden State Warriors, who basically did nothing for months when the offseason started until the very last minute, because there was a holdout of the Jonathan Kuminga situation where they were basically holding him hostage. He didn't want to take the qualifying offer, but he didn't like the deal they had. He wanted no trade clause. They didn't want that. He wanted 3 or 4 years. They wanted 1 or 2. And it seems like what the deal they settled on, it was a 2-year deal. It essentially just set up for him to be traded at some point, probably this season. So the roster is a little incomplete because I doubt this is what it's going to look like at the end of the year. But I do actually like a lot of the moves they made otherwise, besides just bringing back Kuminga. They lose Kevon Looney, who he was in and out of the rotation at times last year, but obviously has been a big part of this team over his career with Golden State. But they bring in Al Horford, who's still been really, really good at his old age over the last few years with the Celtics. They bring back D'Anthony Melton, who they had last year. He was out for the season with, I think, an ACL injury or something. They trade him away for Schroeder, who they end up then trading away again for Jimmy Butler. But they bring Melton back, who I think they probably wouldn't have traded if he had not gotten hurt last year. They re-signed Gary Payton along with Kuminga. And so, like the Clippers, this is on paper, a really nice, solid rotation. I mean, the core, a full season with Jimmy, Steph, Draymond. They bring in Horford, who is finally a reliable 5-man that they just have not had, a guy who can space the floor and defend. They've kind of had this by committee approach at the 5, predominantly playing Draymond there, but they make concessions. When Looney's out there, they have no spacing. When Quentin Post was out there, they don't have much defense. When Trace Jackson Davis is out there, he's not a spacer either, and he's kind of a mixed bag on defense, so you don't really know what you're getting. So the center position has ultimately been something where they've been like, sorry, Draymond, but we just need you to play 30 minutes at the center spot. And I don't really think they want to have to do that. I think they want to have that as a wrinkle of the team. Obviously, that's been a really nice tool for them throughout Draymond's career. But I think they want the lineup diversity. I mentioned them to the Clippers. That is something that is big in the NBA today. Can you play multiple ways? Can you play big? Can you play small? Can you space the floor? Can you prioritize defense? And the Warriors have more options there now. And I think Al Horford genuinely is the perfect fit for this team because, like I said, he can space the floor very effectively, but he also provides defense. He's not some big rim presence as a shot blocker, but he's extremely versatile and just really solid there, even though he's getting up there in age. And then I still really like D'Anthony Melton personally. I think he's a really nice two-way combo guard off the bench and will give them good minutes. He can knock down from 3, but also is a really good perimeter defender. I've been the biggest pods guy of probably anybody that covers the league, so I love him. Then they still have Buddy Hield, Moses Moody, Quentin Post, like I mentioned, Kuminga back, Gary Payton. They got guys. They have options. They can go offense. They can go defense. They can go shooting. They can do whatever they need to do there, really. And the biggest thing with this is they were really good last year when Jimmy Butler played. That is, to me, the biggest thing going into this year. It's not about who they added, but having a full season of him. They were 22-5 when he and Steph both played last season. And they looked really good in game 1 against the Timberwolves when Steph played before he got hurt. There's a real chance I thought they could have won that series if Steph had actually played. I thought that they made Minnesota uncomfortable defensively and had enough offensively when Steph was out there, but they just ran out of gas on offense, obviously, without Steph in there. So, but the point is, when Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry have suited up for this team, they are incredibly, incredibly hard to beat. And now they're even better on paper with Horford and Melton and all these guys and supporting cast that they have across the board. And they're just going to be like the Clippers, just a high IQ team, a lot of just professionals. I know they have some younger guys. When I say professionals, maybe that's excluding Kuminga potentially, but you get the point. Just a lot of adults that they know how to win, and you have to trust their coach. The Steph, Draymond, Jimmy infrastructure is just always going to be rock solid. But there are questions for me with this team too. Like I mentioned, they are just old as hell. Steph is 37. Jimmy is 36. Draymond is 35. Horford is 39. I think they're going to have probably the oldest starting lineup in the history of the NBA. I can't even fathom a team ever before this that started 4 guys that are 35 or older. That is just unheard of. And it's a shame because, if all these guys were in the prime, it'd be an insane fit between prime Horford and, Jimmy, Steph, whatever. But they're not. And you have to keep in mind that Al Horford hasn't played in a back-to-back, and I think they said 4 seasons or something like that. So he's going to miss games. And aside from just them being old and having to rest or something like that, these guys have not been super durable anyway. Jimmy Butler hasn't hit the 65-game mark since 2019. That is 6 seasons ago. He averaged 58 games per season since 2020. So you can basically lock him into 25 games that he's not going to play. That has just been a mark it down. Jimmy Butler's going to miss 25 games really in the last half decade plus. Steph did play 70 and 74 the last 2 years, but before then, He had 56, 64, 63, 5, 69, 51. So that's 51 per year for the 6 seasons before the last two. Again, 2 good years of health, so I can't say he's definitely going to be hurt, but it's not like Steph has some flawless injury track record either. And then Draymond has played only 58 games per season over his last 6 seasons. So you can lock him in for 25 games out too. So, and then Horford, like I mentioned, he's going to rest on back-to-back 64 games played per season for the last 4 seasons. So that's 15 to 20 games he's going to miss. So they're almost a lock for their top 4 guys, as far as I'm concerned, to miss 25 games. And so that's scary, because what if they miss them all at the same time? Then they're probably going to lose almost all of those games. What if they're dispersed and they don't have a lot of overlap between when they do play? Then sure, they can still win some of those games, but they're not going to have any consistent stretch of like really strong play, because we saw last year when Jimmy was not on this team, they were extremely mediocre. They were 500. They were not only not going to make the playoffs, it looked like they were not even going to make the play in before they traded for Jimmy and turned their season around. So one guy goes down like that, and we saw how detrimental it can be to this group with how packed the West is. And, you know, not to mention Steph played worse before Jimmy got there. Like, his numbers were down. He was having near career lows in shooting percentages, the lowest points per game he's had in like a decade or something like that. He really picked it up when Jimmy came back. But that's just to say that there's a trickle down effect for all of that with guys missing games. That's not even to mention that Gary Payton and Buddy Hield both turned 33 in December too. So they have other older guys on the roster too. But aside from just that, I do have other concerns. Like, this is still a really small team. And I think in certain matchups, they're going to be fine, and they can take advantage of how their smallness against some of the bigger teams that maybe can't defend them as well because of that sort of mismatch there. But it's going to go both ways, I think. I mean, they struggled against Houston with some of their size through a lot of that series. And if they play Denver, for example, they're just not going to have any answer for Jokic. Like, they don't have Horford and Draymond are going to have to do their best, but Draymond has never had a lot of success against Jokic because he's just so big and so good. And then Horford, again, is just, it's a lot to ask out of a 39-year-old is all I will say. So they're one of the smallest teams in the NBA. They're one of the oldest teams in the NBA. And so that combination is just not my favorite. But here's where I ultimately stand on the Warriors. I think that their roster is a very good roster. They have star power. They have depth. They have guys I trust in a postseason setting. And so I think if they get to the playoffs and can avoid some of the top teams like OKC and Denver, I think they have a shot to beat anybody. I think they could beat anybody except for Denver and OKC come playoff time. So to me, they are a threat to at least go to like the conference finals or something. But the reason I'm a little lower on them, and why I think that there's, again, sort of a tier below some of the other semi-contenders, is because I do think that a lot of these guys are going to miss a lot of games. And so I think their record is going to be artificially deflated. So if everybody played, I think they could be a 50-plus win team. But I think because of the games that they're going to miss, they're going to fall back a little bit. And in the West, you have a little bit of injuries, and you fall from the 2 seed to the 7 seed like that. We've seen that a lot over the past few years. And so I just worry that they're going to be a 7 or 8 seed, for example. And if they are a 7 or 8 seed, they're going to have to play probably OKC or Denver in the first round. And if that's the case, I just don't see them beating them. So I worry about where they'll finish in the regular season. I think they need to take it a little bit more seriously than they have in years past, because they're just going to end up in a situation where they're basically drawing dead come playoff time, because the team they're playing is just one of the best teams in the league in the first round. And so we're going to say like, oh, the Warriors lost first round. Doesn't mean that they were not one of the 4 best teams in the West. It's all about matchups. So I think if they can get a 4 or 5 seed and play Houston or the Clippers or the Lakers or Wolves or any of these teams, like, I think they can beat those teams. So I'm not saying that they're worse than those teams. I just think that because of the fact that they're old, the fact that they're injury prone, the fact that they're small too, I just worry that they're going to have a lower seed and as a result probably lose earlier than they would hope to. But again, on paper, very strong team, but just a little too old, little too injury prone. Moving to the next tier, this is tier 3, and this one is called Lurking with Some Luck. There are 4 teams in this tier. This tier is basically to say these 4 teams should not be viewed as the favorites in their respective conferences. They are not likely to win the NBA championship. They should not be even favored to make the finals. But if they get a little bit of luck, some stuff breaks their way, maybe there's some injuries for other teams in the conference, some matchups that turn a little favorable for them, they at least have a shot to think they could make a finals run, for example. Again, I'm not predicting it. I'm not saying any of these teams will, but these teams, I would be shocked if they ended up there based on, again, either injury related or maybe in the West, somebody else gets the number 1 seed and then the Thunder and Nuggets play in the second round. So then this team maybe only has to play one of those teams. So again, it's going to be an uphill battle, but I can't totally rule them out as a team that could go all the way. I don't know about win the whole thing necessarily, but at least make a finals run. So starting off with the first team, number 8, the Orlando Magic, who had by far their most impactful and we're going for it offseason that they've had in really a long time. They've had this core of Jalen Suggs, Paolo Banchero, and Franz Wagner over the last 3 years or so. And they've kind of stood pat and like, okay, we want to see what these guys have. But they finally saw enough where they decided that they could, make a legitimate move. And so they go out this offseason, trade 4 first-round picks for Desmond Bane as the shooter and secondary creator that the team has desperately needed. They also add Tyus Jones. They draft Jace Richardson and Noah Penda out of the second round. Mo Wagner is supposed to come back at some point. I don't know exactly, probably later in the year, but then they lose Cole Anthony, Gary Harris, and Corey Joseph. And so I just love what the Magic did this offseason because it's so frustrating year after year where we see these teams that it's like so obvious what their hole is and what they needed, and they don't do anything about it. It's like the Thunder 2 years ago. We were like, they're not big enough. They don't have enough size. They're not going to be able to rebound. Then they get just manhandled in the paint against Dallas in the second round, but then they finally pivot and make a move and add Hartenstein, and it made the difference. Then you look at Denver, you're like, God, they just haven't had any depth. And then this offseason, they finally go out and add some pieces. So Orlando was in the same boat. They've just been underratedly awful offensively across the board. People always want to make it down to, oh, well, they didn't have any shooting, which is true, but it's not just the shooting. They also just lack general creation, reliable ball handlers. Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner have had to do everything for this team offensively. And they are very young players that are not guards. So they're still learning on the fly how to be an effective creator and initiator and to run the offense. And it can be clunky at times. We've seen it look a little clunky with them. But again, like Paolo Banchero, not the most efficient player throughout his career. That's a lot to do with the fact that he has to bail this team out all the time. Someone just throws it to him on the shot clock with 3 seconds, and he's got to take a bad shot because no one could run anything during the possession. So again, it's not just the shooting piece. They desperately need to address shooting, but they also need to just add people that can dribble the ball, add people that can run sets on offense, add people that can, create a little bit. And so they did exactly that. And I'll start with Desmond Bane, who underratedly one of the best shooters, not just in the league right now, but like early on in his career. He's up there with Steph and Clay and other guys in terms of just percentage and volume that he's had early in his career. He is a tremendous shooter. But the best part about Bane is that he's not just a shooter and that he's comfortable wearing multiple hats. We saw him in Memphis when Ja and Jaren Jackson were healthy. He was very comfortable and willing to kind of play that third fiddle and be the release valve for those guys, the guy that the defense can't cheat off of. So open things up for them and be that dead-eye shooter. But they've had a lot of injuries over the year, particularly with Ja, and Jaren Jackson's missed some time too, but Ja with the suspension and injuries and whatnot. Bane has had to take on more of that offensive responsibility, and he has taken it in stride. Like, again, do you want him to be your go-to guy and initiator? No. But he has been so much more effective as a guy that can run a little bit of the pick and roll, that can get downhill going to the basket off more than just a pump fake and close out. Like, he can create a little bit, not only for himself, but for others in a way that this team just has not had guys that can do that. And so obviously his shooting is going to pay huge dividends for this team, but it's not just the shooting. It's the fact that he can do more with the ball. And finally, the Magic have another player besides Paolo and Franz and like Jalen Suggs a little bit that can do something with the ball and not have to just stand out on the corner and for most of the guys on this team not even be able to make shots when they get the ball there. And again, it's not just Bane. They had Tyus Jones, which I think was a sneaky pickup that really nobody talked about. But they really struggled last year when Jalen Suggs didn't play because they didn't really have any guards, any point guards that they could rely on. They end up starting Corey Joseph down the stretch of the season, who is old and washed and wasn't very good even in his prime, but they still went 11-5 when Corey Joseph was the starter. Because it just showed you that when they had an adult running the offense, a guy who can actually dribble the ball, a guy who can get them into their sets, a guy who can make an open shot when he needs to, it made a huge difference for them. And Tyus Jones is basically a glorified, way better version of Corey Joseph. He shot around 40% from three over his last couple of years. He's got the best assist to turnover ratio for like 7 years in a row or something like that. Like, he is just everything that they need to be able to let Franz and Paolo get the ball in their spots so they don't have to get themselves in their spots. And I think that two of those guys are going to be way more efficient this season because they're not having to do it all themselves. They can do it themselves, and this team will be at their best if they do it themselves sometimes, but not all the time. And I also think that's probably a big reason why the Franz Paolo on-off numbers are a little weird, where they don't really play their best net rating-wise when they're both on the court together. That's because they're both having to kind of do a your turn, my turn. But if they can have other people get them the balls within the flow of the offense, I think it's just going to make things so much smoother for this team offensively. And then we know what they are defensively. They've been one of the best defensive teams over the past couple of years. I see no reason why they won't continue to be that. Bane is plenty good on that end of the court. Tyus Jones, not so much, but again, he's more of a situational player. He's probably not going to start for them anyway. So it won't kill them on defense because he probably won't even be closing games anyway. But at least you have the option there. But another reason why I'm just so high in the Magic this year is because when they've been healthy, when Suggs, Paolo, and Franz play, this team already, before these additions, before Bane, before Jones, before Jace Richardson, before these guys continue to develop even further throughout their career this season and the coming years, they already were really good when those three guys played. They only played 6 games together, the three of them, all of last season, which is crazy to say. They went 41-41. They were 500. They ended up with the 7th seed, make the playoffs. Disappointing year across the board, but they were killed by injuries. The guys played 6 games total together. They were 4-2 in those games, so they were solid when they did play. And even just last year, Suggs alone, when he played with either Paolo or Franz, they were 20-11. So they were very good last year when they had Suggs and at least one of the other two guys. They were a 47-win team in 2024, and all three guys played 72-plus games in that season. And in 2024, when all three of them did play, they were 39-24. So that's a 43-26 record when all three play over the past 2 years. That's 51 win pace. And that's a large sample. I mean, it's not a full season, but it's close to a full season. And those guys are only going to get better. They now have actual shooting next to them. They have other people that can dribble the ball. And they've already been a 51 win pace without any of that. So to me, that paired with the East being wide open, I think Orlando is a legitimate threat to make the conference finals. And I think that, again, if everything broke their way, they get a little luck here with a matchup or an injury, I cannot rule them out as a sneaky finals dark horse here because I think they're that good. I think Paolo is poised to be an all-NBA guy this year. I think Franz is going to make his first all-star team. I think Jalen Suggs is just one of the most impactful perimeter defenders we have in the league. I think Desmond Bane's going to fit in flawlessly. I think they have plenty of depth. And the defense is just going to be good. We know it is. But obviously there are questions. The health has been a thing. You know, Jalen Suggs particularly, only 48 games played as a rookie, 53 in year 2, 35 last year. He is currently hurt, going to miss at least a little bit of the start of the season, it sounds like. So he needs to be healthy because there's been a direct correlation between when he plays and when they don't play and their record. Like, he's been really important. I think he's going to be slightly less important just because offensively, now they have Bane and Tyus Jones to do some more of the guard play there. But defensively is where he's the most impactful. And so to maximize what they can be there, especially if you're playing him alongside of Tyus Jones to cover up some of those shortcomings that he has on the defensive end, they're going to need him out there. So look, if Suggs plays 40 games, then this take could look silly, obviously. But he's still young, and I think they're in a better position to overcome injuries there. But overall, you know, Franz and Paolo had weird injuries last year, but they've been durable players across the board. Otherwise, Desmond Bane's been pretty durable too. So overall, I'm not totally worried about their health. But The shooting questions will still hold because outside of Bane, outside of Tyus Jones, there's still not a ton of shooting. You know, Franz has only shot 29% from three over the last 2 years. Jalen Suggs was only 31% last year. He did shoot 40 the year before that, but then the 2 years combined before that, 27%. So he's been bad for his career and had one outlier good season. And then Paolo's only 32% for his career as well. So that's three guys that have been not just below league average, well below league average. And has been their three best players over the past few years. So they're going to need those guys to hit shots if they do want to go on a fouls run, for example. One of the variables I'm saying if they wanted to make it to that point would be, can they hit shots? Can Franz just hit league average from three? It's a low bar. That's all he needs to do. He did it for 2 seasons, and then it's just fallen off a cliff, his jump shot in recent years. I do think Paolo, for example, will probably have an uptick in shooting this year just because he'll have more catch and shoot versus off the dribble because of the supporting cast around him. So Orlando, I think they're still a clear step below the top 2 teams in the East, but I think they're closer to those 2 teams than the rest of the East, in my opinion. And like I said, I think that they are a sneaky dark horse to make at least the conference finals, if not the finals, but things would need to go their way. But I'm very, very high on them, and I think they'll be a 50-plus win team this season. Up next, we have at number 7, the Houston Rockets, who I probably would have had a lot higher than this. When I initially did my first draft of these contender tiers months ago, I had the Rockets number 3 overall because I thought that they were right there with the Nuggets. They had a chance to be competitive with the Thunder, but the Fred VanVleet injury is just a big thing for me. And I just think that loss is significant. But let me just recap their roster moves to this point. They obviously add Kevin Durant. That was a pretty big headline deal there. They get Dorian Finney-Smith as well, Clint Capella, Josh Okogie. They lose Jalen Green and Dylan Brooks in the KD trade. And then they lose Fred VanVleet, as I mentioned. And so I've heard a lot of people talk about this could be a blessing in disguise because Reed Shepherd's going to break out and Amen Thompson can flourish and we can see what he has. And I just feel like that takes a little disingenuous because those things still could have happened if Fred VanVleet was on the roster and playing. But also, I am the biggest Reed Shepherd fan there is. I picked him as an all-star coming out of the draft. I said he was my number 1 prospect for that draft. I still believe he's going to be a very good player. And he didn't play a lot as a rookie, obviously. But I just think it's a lot to ask to have him. Like, I was really excited and ready for him to step up into the full-time backup point guard role, a guy that could be a fun energy guy off the bench, maybe even be in the 6-man conversation, a Ty Jerome type guy this year. But asking him to be the full-time guy on a team that now you add Kevin Durant to your team and you have championship expectations. This is no longer let's just see the young guys, how they play out. And like, we're playing with house money. Like, no, he's 37 years old. Kevin Durant is. You don't add him unless you're going for it. You want to win now. Otherwise, you don't do that trade. And I know they didn't know that Fred was going to be hurt, but regardless, I just think it's a lot to ask for Reed Shepherd and Amen Thompson. I do not think that he is a point guard. I think he's honest. I don't know what position he is. If I'm being totally honest with you, he can play power forward. He's played some point guard. Like, I think he's a wing if we want to just classify him as that. But I just don't think, again, he's ready to be a full-time, I am the starting point guard running our offense for a team that's supposed to be a championship contender this season. And just to put into perspective, with Fred VanVleet, they were 41-19 last year when he played, and 11-11 without him. And you can say small sample, blah, 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 whatever. But I just think what he did for this team is so important. He is just so steady, the reliable guy with the ball in his hands. He makes good decisions. He's not the most efficient player, but he can knock it down from outside, gets people the ball in their spots. He makes the right reads, and he just is the adult in this backcourt. And now they do not have an adult in the backcourt, and that worries me. And we've seen a lot of teams recently try to do the we don't really have a point guard, and it's been mixed results. And we just saw a team with Kevin Durant on it in Phoenix try that, and it didn't go very well. And so, look, Kevin Durant's going to help in a lot of ways, but he's just not a primary ball handler at this point in his career. I think he is more of a play finisher, if you will, a guy that is unreal at making difficult shots. But is he a guy that you want initiating the offense? Is he a guy that you want, running 10 pick and rolls a game that is having to do everything? Because ultimately, Kevin Durant, he's not a black hole type player, but most of his scoring is just out of isolation. And a lot of the times when he has the ball, it's isolation plays. This team already was near the bottom of the league last year in terms of passes and assists per game. And you add in a guy that is kind of like, again, I don't want to call him a ball stopper because I think that's not what he is. I do think he plays in the flow and he's willing to play off ball and stuff like that. But I feel like they're just going to ask him to basically be a ball stopper. They're going to want him to play the Jalen Green role. And that's not a role that you want really anyone playing in your team, because then your offense just stagnates and then you don't have Van Vliet to help run the sets. And so I just worry this offense is going to get really, really bogged down without Fred Van Vliet. And Kevin Durant, obviously a incredible shot maker, but I worry about a team that's asking him to do that much, because he's been putting up gaudy numbers and he's still making all-star teams and all that. But if you look at the advanced stats, they are significantly down from his prime. Like the eye test and the advanced numbers tell you that maybe his points are not quite as impactful as they used to be. Again, I ranked him number 10 in my rankings. I still think he's a top 10 player, like ridiculous offensive threat. But I'm just saying that, again, I don't think he makes defenses react in the same sort of way that like an Ant does when he puts pressure on the rim, or Halliburton does where you've got to watch all the shooters around you, or Luka, who's such a dual threat where you don't know if he's going to shoot or pass it. And if you get him in the pick and roll, he's one of the best lob throwers. But if you go underneath, he's deadly on the step back. Like, I just think all these guys have more facets to their offensive game, whereas Durant is elite at making difficult shots. But a difficult shot is like, you're going to live with him shooting that. And of course, he's going to make more than the average player. But you're not having to have the defense really react a lot. You're not like collapsing. Oh my God, we got to help off this because he's, it's going to be more like we saw in the postseason a couple of years ago with Minnesota. They put Karl Anthony Towns on KD. They didn't send doubles, and KD got his, but the team got swept because there was just no diversity to the offense, and they were going to be willing to let him just kind of fall back into his, okay, well, I'll just go get us a bucket mentality. And none of that's to mention that Kevin Durant has not been very durable. He played 75 games in 2024, but other than that, he hasn't hit the 65 game mark since 2019. He's played 46 games per year since 2020, 55 games in that span if you exclude the year where he missed all the season. So still almost 30 games that he's missed basically every year. And so what happens when he misses games? No Fred, no Kevin Durant, no Jalen Green anymore. Jalen Green played 82 games for this team. I'm not even a Jalen Green fan, but at least that was every single game they had a dude who was a threat to get 35 and could create a shot for himself. So this offense, when Kevin Durant misses games, because he will miss games, I'm not saying he's going to play 50 games, but he's not going to play 75. I'll tell you that. So if he misses 15, 20 games, this offense, without Fred Van Vliet, even with Jalen Green last year, they were still a 500 team. So I get really worried what they're going to look like without KD. I worry that the offense is going to still be just not that good. And I know Kevin Durant, in theory, is such an upgrade over Jalen Green. And I still think that trade was worth making. But that was with the context of having Fred Van Vliet. And so I just think him not being there makes such a difference in terms of the reliability on the perimeter and as a shooting team, because they are losing 579 made three-pointers last season between Jalen Green, Fred Van Vliet, and Dillon Brooks. Those are the three players on the team with by far the most three-pointers made. No one else on the team even made 100. And even with those guys, they were 22nd in the NBA in three-pointers made. 22nd. So just to get back to 22nd in theory, they need to make up almost 600 made threes. Where are those coming from? Where are those three-pointers coming from? Because they're not coming from the bigs. Amen Thompson is still an awful shooter to this point. People love him, but that jump shot is broken still. Like, he's not going to hit 100 threes. It's just not going to happen. Kevin Durant, he's going to get his, but at best, what's he going to hit, like 200? you're still leaving 300 to 400 on the board. Like, you need a big step up from Jabari Smith. You need a bunch of threes from Dorian Finney-Smith. You need a big step up from Reed Shepherd. So I just this offense concerns me in a lot of ways because I think it's going to be overly Kevin Durant reliant, and I don't know at this point in his career if he's fit to be that much of a focal point. I think he's best as an elite play finisher next to other players that are creators that can get him the ball and do other things and get others involved as well. And so I am concerned there. But I'll say this. I know I just went 10 minutes with all negative on the Rockets. They have an incredibly high floor because of their defense, and I think that they are still going to be a very, very good team. I think Şengün is primed to push himself into the potential All-NBA category. I think Reed Shepherd still will have a really good year. I just don't know like how consistent he'll be, but I think the talent's absolutely there. I love Tari Eason still. I think Finney-Smith was a great pickup. They've got plenty of options at big man. Kevin Durant's an upgrade. Like, there is still a lot to like. I think Ime Udoka gives a high floor for his teams as well because of his defensive system. But I am more on the side of I think Houston's going to be a little worse than people think. I think they could be more in the 5, 6, 7 seed range rather than the 2 or 3 seed range, which if they had Fred VanVleet, I really think I would have had him as like a clear-cut top 3 team in the West, which it might sound silly because you're like, Fred VanVleet's not that good. But I just think they don't have another player on the roster that can replicate what he did for this team. Because it's not just the ball handling, it's the shooting, it's the IQ, it's all of it. So I'm a little concerned with that. I still think they're a good team, like I said, but I have my concerns, obviously. Up next at number 6, we have the Minnesota Timberwolves. And last year, they got off to a little bit of a rocky start. They were 32-29. They finished the year 17-4, though. They went 8-2 in his first 2 rounds of the playoffs. So they basically had a 25-6 stretch before they lost in the conference finals to OKC in 5. So, bumpy start. There were questions about the fit with Randall, but they were by far, just one of the best teams in the league. One of the 3 to 4 best teams in the league for basically a 2-month sample. And they make it all the way to their second consecutive conference finals. So we know that, come playoff team, they are forced to be reckoned with. And in that span of making conference finals, they've knocked off some really, really good teams and players in particular. They beat Jokic, they beat KD, they beat Devin Booker, they beat Luka, they beat Jimmy Butler, they beat LeBron. Like, they have been just consistently solid come playoff time the past 2 years, at least until the conference finals where things have kind of fall apart. But they did have a pretty, at least notable loss this offseason, losing Nickeil Alexander-Walker. They also lose Josh Minot and Luka Garza. Those are lesser names, obviously. They draft Joan Behringer, but they didn't really add anybody else. And this is a team that's going into this year really banking on internal development and some of their younger guys stepping up, because last year they didn't get too much out of Rob Dillingham. Terrence Shannon showed some flashes in the playoffs, and Jalen Clark played some minutes. But none of those guys are consistently in the rotation, but they didn't really need them to, because, Conley was still at least solid sometimes, and then Alexander Walker was really good for them. But I do think that is a risky stance to take, because it reminds me a lot of a team with Nikola Jokic on it, the Denver Nuggets. The past few years, they have said, you know what, we don't need to add guys. We can let some of our role players walk in free agency to save money because we have these young guys that we can backfill. And that just has not worked out super well for them. And so I worry that it might be similar for Minnesota this season. With the loss of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, they really do not have a lot of reliable guys at the guard spot. Like, outside of Anthony Edwards, who can run the offense, who can handle the ball? Like, DiVincenzo maybe in spurts. And you can say, okay, well, Mike Conley, obviously. But Conley last year was rough a lot of the time. He's in his late 30s now. He shot only 38% from 2-point range last year. So he's essentially turned into a spot-up shooter, and that's about it. He's not doing anything inside the arc, no penetration whatsoever. And he did not score more than 18 points in a game all season long. he only hit double-digit points 24 times on the year and only hit 15 plus 8 times. So he is a non-threat as a scorer, really a non-threat as a creator inside the arc. He's basically a guy that brings the ball up, can run some sets, and then is a spot-up shooter. And he can do some of that stuff, and it can be fine, but he's a shell of what he was. Mike Conley in his prime was really, really good, and he's just not that anymore. And he's another year older, and he was rough in the postseason for stretches last year too. Defensively, he's not what he used to be. And so I don't know if you can count on him as being the reliable guy that he's been for this team. And so if you don't count on him and you lose Alexander Walker, DiVincenzo ideally is really just more of a spot up guy, then they're going to need somebody to step up from their young guys. Rob Dillingham, they gave up a first round pick and a unprotected swap 7 years down the line to get him, to draft him number 8 overall. Like, they need him to step up. They made a big investment in him. Last year, I didn't love what I saw. I thought he looked really small out there. He looked like he's just going to get picked on consistently defensively. He's more of a score first guy than a pass first guy, which I feel like they need more of a pass first guy next to Ant. And so I worry that is his ceiling just a, Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams type, this spark plug scorer combo guard off the bench. And I'm sure that might help them a little bit, but I feel like they need more than that. I think they need a guy that can finish games, that can play on both ends of the court, that can get the team into their offensive sets so that Ant doesn't have to do everything. Because I worry there's going to be a lot of pressure on Anthony Edwards this year to have to do almost everything offensively. Maybe they get more out of Jalen Clark or Terrence Shannon, but again, those guys are more wings than they are ball handlers anyway. And so I just feel like their talent is kind of thinned out across the board. Like, if you just look at guys you trust on this team, Ant, Julius Randle, most of the time, Gobert again, most of the time, Naz Reid, DiVincenzo, Jaden Daniels. That's 6 guys. Again, it's reminding me a lot of the Nuggets, who had a deep 8 to 9 man rotation, was dwindling down until suddenly you're like, oh man, they got 6 dudes that I only kind of trust. And so unless Dillingham steps up, unless Terrence Shannon steps up, unless Jalen Clark steps up, then I don't know. I just worry that it's going to be a lot of Ant, a lot of Randall, those 2 dudes doing everything, a lot of, not good ball movement, isolation offense. And I don't know if that's what I want out of this group. And I will say they have a tremendously high floor because their defense is going to be rock solid. They've been top 6 the past couple of years, top 10 since Gobert's gotten there. Like, between Gobert anchoring, Ant on the perimeter, Jaden Daniels on the perimeter, like, they're going to be a good defensive team. I don't doubt that. So again, a lot of negative, just like with the Rockets, but I'm more just tempering expectations, because I've heard people talk about this team as sort of like a clear-cut number 3 in the West, team that can make the finals. Like, I don't know if I'd quite put them there. Again, they're in this tier where I think things need to break their way. But one of the things that needs to break their way is Dillingham needs to be like a legit rotation piece. Terrence Shannon needs to be a legit rotation piece. Because without that, like I said, it just feels like very Nuggets-esque, where they don't have a lot of guys I trust. They're going to have a thin rotation. And the difference is Ant is not Jokic. Ant is really, really good. I had him as the 6th best player in my top 100 rankings, so I think tremendously high of him. But yeah, I had Jokic number 1. Like, Jokic can carry a team more than Ant can. We've seen Ant's limitations, that he can, still struggle to make the right reads at times. He gets a little disengaged when he's forced off ball. He doesn't handle double teams super well. Like, those are all still things that are there. He obviously can, and I bet he will improve on them. But he still is predominantly, like, he wants to score and shoot before he wants to get others involved. And if he's not going to get others involved at the level he needs to, then who's going to do it? Because I don't trust Conley too, and these young guys are still very unproven. Additionally, they were very healthy last year. Ant played 79 games. Jaden McDaniels, all 82. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, all 82. Randall, 69. Gobert, 72. Naz Reid, 80. Conley, 71. DiVincenzo was the only one that was below 70 at 62, but even that's not like crazy low. So their entire rotation was extremely healthy last year. And we've seen this in the past with teams that have this great injury luck, and it's hard to replicate because it's just injuries are random and you don't know when they're going to come. And so if Ant plays 65 games instead of 79, like this team's going to be rough if he's not out there offensively. So there are some red flags with Minnesota for me, but again, the track record is there. Back-to-back conference finalists, Anthony Edwards leading the show as a like bona fide top 10 guy, pushing the top 5. I had him 6, but I had Tatum 5 because I included injured guys. So to me, he's the best. He's the 5th best playing player this year. So I think, pushing top 5 in the league right now with a top 5 defense, most likely, with still some good pieces around them. Like, they're going to be a really good team. But I think it's going to be a little bit of a wake up call to say that, look, they can't get complacent. They can't let guys leave for nothing and expect to, still be the same level of team. And we've seen that out of Denver the past couple years. And so I think it just could be a similar story with Minnesota. And then the last team in this tier, number 5, I have the Los Angeles Lakers, who lost Dorian Finney-Smith, Jordan Goodwin. They add DeAndre Ayton, Jake LaRavia, Marcus Smart. Jared Vanderbilt is back healthy finally. Maxi Kleber, they should get back at some point. LeBron is actually out to start the year, so we don't know how long he's going to be out. And I know I have the Lakers a little bit higher than probably most people do. I've seen a lot of people have them more in the 6-7 seed range, and I've got them above Minnesota, above Houston, above Golden State. Again, I want to preface that these are contender tier rankings. This is not a standings predictions, which I put mine out yesterday, actually, on my social media. But the Lakers, to me, I thought they had an opportunity to put together a really strong offseason. They had clear needs. They make this trade for Luka last year, and the roster was incomplete, but it's a deal you have to do. So they kind of just rolled with the punches with what they had. And this year, they needed to add a big man. They had no size down low after giving up Anthony Davis. And they did that in DeAndre Ayton. But again, it was about the lowest bar possible. I mean, he's been not wanted by either of his past 2 teams. He's been lackadaisical on defense. He's obsessed with shooting the mid-range when he doesn't hit it at a high clip. He plays with no force down low, and he's just disengaged a lot of the time. So Ayton is a deeply flawed player. Maybe they can revitalize him, but I just say that to say, like, there was a lot of better options they could have went for, and they didn't. And not only did they not add a better center than Ayton, they didn't add a second center. They still have Jackson Hayes as their backup, or Maxi Kleber whenever he comes back. So the size is still lacking across the board. It would have been nice, for them to actually solidify that rotation and say, look, here, we're going to go get a Nick Claxton, and then we're going to sign a Brook Lopez to be his backup. Just put together different options there, guys that can be good defensively, that what you're getting. Aside from that, they squandered the Dorian Finney-Smith asset. I don't really know what happened there. They let him walk for Jake LaRavia, who to me is a clear downgrade. And also, I thought Finney-Smith was underratedly very, very important for them. I think a lot of that weird stretch where they were way better defensively, even after Anthony Davis, had a lot to do with him, and he was playing small ball 5 for them. And he was just a huge upgrade over D'Angelo Russell. And then they didn't really just make any other impact adds. I mean, Marcus Smart is a decent flyer to take. I think in a best case, he can be a good perimeter defender for them, or at least be able to guard bigger wings. We'll see what he can do offensively. He wasn't even particularly great as a shooter in his prime, but it's a low risk move. They get him for a minimum. It's not a big deal or anything like that. And so they kind of did the bare minimum across the board with these transactions. They added some guys, but nobody flashy. They addressed some of their needs, but not in a way that really you would think moves the needle. And so I was really ready to be very, very high on the Lakers this year, because I was like, all right, Luka is going to have a bounce back year, and they're going to have the full offseason to actually build the right team and roster around him. And so I was a little disappointed with how they handled it across the board. And the whole narrative of like, oh, well, they're on Luka's timeline now, so they're not just going to go all in. I don't I don't really comprehend that at all, because Luka Doncic is fully in his prime and one of the minimum 4 best players, I think 2 to 3 best players in the NBA right now. He just took a team to the NBA Finals. Like, his timeline should be right now. And he's got an all-star next to him in LeBron James, who I don't know how many more years he's going to be on the Lakers. This could be his last season in LA. It could be one of his last seasons in the NBA regardless. And so you don't know for sure that you're going to be able to get another all-star next to him. Like, in theory, they're planning for the head to be able to add one, but it's no sure thing. And so you've got the all-star next to him. You've got assets to make things happen with some of the extra draft picks they have. Austin Reeves, if you absolutely had to include him, they have some tradable salaries on the roster. And so I don't understand this, like, we need to plan for 2 to 3 years from now with Luka. Like, they have Luka Doncic. They should be planning for right now. Right now is what they should be going for. And so I don't get that. But I say all that to say, I still am weirdly a little higher on the Lakers than most. But I want to preface that it is almost entirely a bet on Luka Doncic. I think that this is a guy that, as I said, at worst, the fourth best player in the league. At best, maybe the second. And obviously, we've seen all of the skinny Luka pictures and videos. But regardless of his weight and the conditioning situation, I think we're going to have a revenge tour season out of Luka. And we've seen him in not that long ago when, the Mavs had a down year and he gets hurt and it's kind of a disaster. They trade for Kyrie. The numbers aren't good. He ends up missing the end of the season. They missed the plan altogether. And then he bounced back that year, won 50-plus games, was a top 4 seed, and made the NBA Finals. And so it just feels like every time that we kind of count him out, he kind of proves again that, like, he can carry a team on his own. Like, if we just look at the team that he brought to the conference finals in 2022, that roster was way worse than this one. Their center rotation was Dwight Powell and Maxi Kleber. DeAndre Ayton's at least better than Dwight Powell. They had Jalen Brunson next to him, who obviously nowhere near the player he is now, but Austin Reeves is at least comparable to that. And then you add in a LeBron James, who is way better than anybody on that team outside of Luka. Plus, the role players are all comparable. That was such a hodgepodge Mavs team. They had Spencer Dinwiddie, Davis Bertans, Reggie Bullock. They had Finney Smith, who was obviously solid. But it was not a very good roster. They made the conference finals because Luka was just that good. We saw him when he made the finals, manhandled Minnesota, comfortably beat OKC, destroyed the Clippers, made them look terrible. And again, it was just because he was that good. And so there is a blueprint with him and decent supporting casts being really successful and making it far. And when he's been healthy, his teams have basically been a guaranteed 48 to 50 wins and a top 4 to 5 seed. So I'm betting on that. I think he will have a bounce back year. I think he will have a healthy year. I think that, to me, he's going to be my MVP pick. And in order for him to win MVP, he probably needs to get a top 4 seed. So I'm banking on that. I know there's been external chatter with the whole LeBron situation, and I don't know when he's going to come back. Genuinely, they're saying it could be till, December or something like that, just with the nature of the injury. So obviously that does hurt. But again, I just think that they have a full offseason here to, orient the team into a Luka team. They were just learning on the fly last year. I think this year JJ Redick will have a lot more of a game plan for how to, have a Luka team and how to get the best out of him and how to have him maximize a lot of their role players. I don't know what they're going to get at Aiden. I don't know what they're going to get at Smart. I don't know what they're going to get at Laravia, but Austin Reeves is a really good player, and Rui Hachimura has been solid. Gabe Vincent, Dalton Connect. I don't love a lot of the roster. They still have a lot of question marks in terms of defensive prowess on the wing with who's going to be the point of attack defender. As I mentioned with Ayton, if he misses time, they're back to having Jackson Hayes as the starter. Like, they don't have reinforcements at a lot of these spots, but I do think they have assets that they can use to go out and, like, during the midseason add here. And I think they probably will, because they do have a little bit more flexibility than some of these other Western Conference playoff teams. But again, it all just comes back to Luka. I am blindly trusting him, and maybe I shouldn't, but I just think that he's that good. And even with the team that he has, it is enough for them to be in the mix as a team that, if everything kind of broke their way, I couldn't totally rule them out knocking off Denver, or at least being competitive with OKC, or, flirting with getting to the finals or something like that. And so that's kind of where I'm at. That's why I have them above those teams, because, to be honest, if you're in this tier, it means you do have flaws. There are problems with the roster. There's a reason you're not one of the top 2 tiers as a contender. And so if you've got a couple flawed teams, a lot of the times I just default to who's the best player and who do I trust most in the biggest moment. And in this tier, it is Luka Doncic. So that's why I have them number 5 and the last team in this tier. And that's going to do it for this episode of the Sean Jones NBA Show. Thank you so much for listening. As I mentioned at the top of the podcast, I released my top 100 player rankings. over the last week. So go check that out. It is on my website. You can find it on my social medias as well. I still have one more episode to do for this series of my preseason contender tiers. I know it is bleeding a little bit into the season. Again, apologies for that, but I should have that out within the next couple of days as well with tiers 1 and 2. And I will still preview the remaining 4 teams as well. But opening night tonight, by the time this is out and you're listening to it, we'll have already had NBA basketball for the 25-26 season. So that's very exciting. And yeah, I'm just looking forward to the season starting and seeing how these teams look and see how right or wrong I am with my contender tiers. So with that being said, thank you so much for listening, and I will chat with you soon.